Hello everyone, I'm Matt from Telling Tales, here with the Symbaroum crew to give you the story so far in our long-running campaign. We stream this series every Wednesday over on Twitch at 8 PM BST, and we'll soon be diving into the epic Throne of Thorns storyline. Come join us to delve into the dark fantasy world of Symbaroum, where shadows reach out from the wilderness to rend the hearts and bodies of those who would be foolish enough to try to claim the land for their own. Our prologue began years before the events of our main campaign, at one of the last refugee camps in the land that was known as Alberator. Now a wasteland after a sorceress war left it barren and lifeless, its occupants travel over the mountains known as the Titans for the promise of life in the new nation of Ambria. We joined one of these groups, who travelled northwards on a treasure hunting expedition, through the mountains and onwards through the new capital of Indaros, and past a new town being built on the edges of the dark and foreboding forest of Davakar, a town called Thistlehold. The expedition was following a map leading them to an ancient ruin, and once they arrived it became clear they were very much out of their depth. Laid low by archaic traps and the hideous boar-like inhabitants, the entire expedition was left either dead or lost to the wilderness.
We met our four adventurers as they came together to investigate strange goings-on and attacks within the walls of Thistlehold. Steo, a gruff and cynical watchman still clearly traumatized by his time spent warring against the dark lords of old Alberator. Ascarai, a changeling scout spending his time guiding others through the fringes of Davakar, as much to keep himself apart from prejudice and scorn as for pay. Ephenea, a brash young barbarian sellsword with a tendency to fall into a furious violent rage when the time comes to fight. Anton, an idealistic theurg of the sun god Prius, who has come to the fringes of Ambria to spread his good word and to see the salvation of the masses. Following leads alongside the sinister witch hunter Balmello, the party ends up tracking a pair of barbarian brothers who were part of an ill-fated treasure hunt into Davakar that recovered a mysterious copper crown, and who now seem to be marked for death by elves striking out from the forest for them. Conflict erupts, and one of the brothers transforms into a hideous, corrupted abomination. After the threat is dealt with, the remaining elf bids them farewell, Balmello leaves on his own business.
Striking north back towards Thistlehold, our party decided to spend the night at a pleasant inn called Jackett's Heart, one built around a pool of sacred water with healing properties. In the middle of the night an assault began, as the goblin tribe known as the Varagoldra assaulted Jackett's Heart in order to gain access to the pool. It quickly became apparent that the tribe were being manipulated by a fallen sellsword called the Nightblade and her witch companion. In the resulting conflict, these foes perished and the inn was saved, though despite the best efforts of the party and a goblin named Shuglad, most of the Varagoldru were also killed.
After returning to Thistlehold, the party became embroiled in the investigation into the serial killer named the Flayer, who was preying on the folk of the town. Over the course of a few days, many discoveries were made. The killer was likely a member of the same crew of treasure hunters who had recovered the copper crown from the depths of Davakar, and that somehow they had also targeted a member of the Iron Pact, the shadowy organisation that seems to be trying to keep the dark forest of Davakar safe from Ambrian meddling. Sometimes assisting and sometimes halting progress was the witch hunter Balmello, who had returned to Thistlehold with a crew of mercenaries. In the meantime, Anton had left on a mission to investigate Balmello's activities in the nearby village of Glimmervan, and had made a terrifying discovery: the body of the witch hunter himself, clearly dead for days, if not weeks. Rushing back to Thistlehold to warn his friends, Anton made it in time to see the aftermath of a confrontation between the party, the Flayer, and the cultists masquerading as Balmello with foul sorcery. In the end, the Flayer lay dead and the cultist known as Adarko had fled to the forest with the copper crown.
The Ordo Magica, masters of matters magical within Ambria, hired our party to investigate the sudden halt of communication with an expedition they had sent north into the forest, an investigation into the ruins that held the now notorious Copper Crown. On their way there, the party took passage on a riverboat, seemingly stricken with some kind of curse, where crew members were vanishing in the night. Though there were complications with stowaways and smugglers, in the end the answer was actually very simple. A huge lobster-like creature had attached itself to the underside of the vessel and was plucking crew off to devour in silence in the night. It was driven off upriver by the blades and arrows of the party, and then shortly they arrived at the barbarian clan port of Jakar.
Striking out from Jakar into Davakar, the party travelled along the river of Malgamor. It was far from a quiet journey, but eventually they reached the Ordo Magica outpost and found some traumatised survivors. They learned that it was likely most of the expedition had fallen foul of a creeping darkness that had left swathes of desiccated lifelessness through the heart of the forest. Travelling further towards the ruins, the party discovered an opportunistic but somewhat accommodating goblin tribe occupying the main encampment, who told them they had come up to the surface following a recent cataclysm that left a sinkhole open some distance away. From another maddened Ordo Magica survivor, the party also discovered a way to protect themselves from the creeping darkness. An ancient spider demigod known as Xanatha had occupied the sinkhole and seemed to offer salvation with her bite. Striking a deal with Xanatha, who desired something known as the Vile Water, the party finally headed towards the ruin from which the Copper Crown had been plucked, the venom of Xanatha in their veins, and heeding warnings from her that the creeping darkness and yet another colossal godlike being, known as the Thorn Queen, sought the Vile Water. After negotiating the traps and guardians of the tomb, the party discovered the evil at its heart, the body of the antediluvian Symbaric king known as Hurrian Lo Apac, from whose mummified corpse the Copper Crown had been plucked. Events descended into chaos, with Ephanea becoming briefly possessed by the ancient king, and the arrival of Adarko's cult, who had patiently waited for the right time out in the forest. Ascarai dispersed the Vile Water, releasing Ephanea but also destroying the wards, keeping various monstrous evils from entering the tomb. Pausing briefly to recover some treasures, the party fought back the creeping darkness as it devoured the cultists, and the tomb began to collapse around them. Ephanea sacrificed herself to allow her friends to escape, and as the titanic forms of the Thorn Queen in the creeping darkness fought above them, the party fled through cracks in the earth to relative safety. When they returned to the outpost, they found themselves stranded in Davakar without their boats, and struck out south in hopes of leaving the forest as quickly as possible.
After a fortuitous encounter with a group of friendly treasure hunters, the party was led to a frontier settlement known as Salindra's Hope. It was surrounded by fearful members of the Karahar tribe, who insisted the land was taboo, and no good would come of digging at a supposed treasure map. After encounters with representatives of the Iron Pact and the Karahar, the situation became alarmingly clear. Within the hills slept a powerful elf known as the Eternal Hunter, caught in a cycle of hunting and destruction, with a potent stag spirit endlessly roaming around the lands nearby. This culminated in a devastating conflict between the two powers, where the treasure hunters were caught between the possession of the Eternal Hunter and the ravening hordes of beasts, commanded by the stag spirit. Many losses were suffered, but finally the conflict was ended by a choice from Ascarai, his arrows striking the Eternal Hunter and allowing the stag to gore and crush the elf finally into the earth of the forest. Almost incidental to all this was the terrifying discovery that the Dark Lords of Alberator were still alive and active in Ambria, and a visit to an old ruin along the way that held the remains of an expedition fallen foul of horrible boar-like abominations.
Finally emerging from under the boughs of Davakar, the party and their iron-packed companion Semel made for the town of Castor, where an old friend of Semel's had sent a letter pleading for aid. They arrived at a settlement in crisis, with council members dead and the town in the grips of a company of sellswords known as the Blue Company. It took some days to unravel the events of the past, reaching all the way back to the burning of sorcerers many years ago. Finally, it emerged that the town had been taken over by a cult of monster worshippers known as Terrato's Dawn, who were attempting to raise a legendary dragon to wreak havoc on Castor and then the rest of Ambria. Thanks to aid provided by the heretical Temple of the Many, various allies the party had made on the way, and the heroic sacrifice of the war hero Isocles, Terrato's Dawn were defeated and the party could finally, and hopefully peacefully, make their way back to Thistlehold, accompanied on the way by a new companion, the former Templar Elandra.